Hello everybody. I went ahead and just completed high on life. Kind of flew through this one, beat it in just a couple days. It's not the longest game out there. It took me about 11 and a half hours to beat it, and I think average completion is around 10 and a half hours. I played through the first 2 or 3 hours on hard mode, and then decided to swap it down to normal, which we'll get to why I did that in the cons. But let me give you the pros, the cons, and then the final verdict. And as always with Game Pass games, I'm going to give you 2 ratings at the end. I'm going to give you a rating if you're playing it on Game Pass, and then I'm going to give it a rating if you're buying it for $60. So let's get into it, shall we? The first pro I would say is going to be very, very subjective, and that is the writing, the voice acting, and just the general comedy in the game. For me, it's a positive because I like Rick and Morty. I'm a fan. I haven't watched their other show, Solar Opposites or whatever the hell it's called, but I've seen all of Rick and Morty, and for the most part, there's definitely some hits and some misses for episodes of Rick and Morty, but for the most part, I like it. I believe the guy's name is Justin Roiland, that is kind of like the head of writing, and he does a lot of voice acting and stuff like that in it. So for the most part, I enjoy that humor. Now, if you don't like this humor, this game is gonna fall flat on its face for you. It is carried very, very heavily by that style of writing that you see in Rick and Morty. So, but it's a little bit more meta in this game. It's very similar to Rick and Morty, but Rick and Morty doesn't get too meta talking about the fact that they're in a show or whatever. This game talks about video games, and it talks about being in a video game. It gets very, very meta. So if you are not a fan of that, this is probably going to be a con for you. And honestly, I'll just tell you straight up, avoid the game entirely if you're not a fan of Justin Roiland's work. If you are, then I think it's a positive. I think that the game has quite a few moments that made me laugh. Sure, when you are taking, a video game and you're extending it out to 10, 11 hours, there's going to be quite a lot of jokes that don't hit. But that's just the nature of comedy in general, right? Some jokes are going to bomb, some bits are going to bomb, and that's definitely the case with this game. But for the most part, I found myself at least breathing heavily out of my nose, reverse snorting or whatever you want to call it, at many of the jokes in the game. I'd say it's probably like a 65-35 split for me, where 65% of the jokes and the comedy hit, 35% I just thought was not really there, but a lot of it does hit, at least for me. But of course, as with everything comedic, it's going to be entirely subjective. The other pro I would say is just the voice acting. Continuing with the writing and just general sound, the voice acting is great. I think the voice acting is phenomenal with every single character. Of course, Kenny, the main gun that you get right out the gate, is, he's just Morty. Like, let's not sugarcoat it. Let's not try and make it seem like they made a completely original character or something like that. It's Morty, and it's the same voice actor and everything. He's just Morty. So, honestly, I personally find the Morty character and voice to get a little bit annoying after time. But the beautiful thing about this game is that, for the most part, you can choose who it is that's doing the most talking. One, they have a setting actually in the options where you can adjust the frequency of how often your guns will talk, because that's kind of the bit of the game. All of your guns are characters, they're talking, they're not actually guns, they are Gatlians, which is a type of alien race. So all of them are characters with their own personalities, their own agendas, their own experiences, and their own views. And the beautiful thing about that is that if you don't like the personality of, say, Kenny, the main gun that you start with, just play through the game with one of the other guns, and you will have that character do most of the voice acting. Now, no matter if you stick with just one gun the entire time, you just stick with Kenny the entire time or not, all of the guns are going to talk in story bits and stuff like that, and you're going to have to use all of them because they all bring unique abilities to the table. So you're still going to be cycling through all of them, but I do really like the fact that if you get a little bit annoyed with one gun, just play the game with a different gun out, and that will be the vast majority of the dialogue is through that gun's, point of view. And going into the gameplay and using all of these guns, I think that there's a lot of creativity here. This game is a Metroidvania, which I did not actually know. In case you don't know what a Metroidvania is, it's a game that utilizes a lot of the mechanics that you see in Metroid and Castlevania games of old, where you'll come across an area, you'll only be able to typically go one way, but there'll be many pathways. It's just, you'll see that and you'll see another pathway and you'll say, well, I don't have the equipment necessary in order to traverse that area yet, so I will get that ability and then I can remember that and come back, and now I can explore that new path. So that's what a Metroidvania is, and this game does that in spades. There's all sorts of equipment that will let you traverse the areas more efficiently, or just get to high ground when you couldn't before, or cross a large body of water that you couldn't before. And I thought in general, it does that very well, surprisingly. I found the actual traversal itself to not be the most mechanically intensive or anything like that. This is not like a hardcore platformer by any means, but it's serviceable enough. And I think in general, that's how I would describe a lot of the game, is serviceable. It does its job, but it's not wowing you. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in cons. But I think in general, the actual gameplay and a lot of the mechanics that these other weapons bring in are very unique. Even if the execution is not quite there, the ideas are great. And this is actually what I would say for the general game as a whole, is that there's so much creativity here and so many very unique mechanics, at least to a first-person shooter, that I really like it. I really like those fresh ideas that come from a mind that isn't, stuck in a franchise like Call of Duty or something like that, right? These are fresh minds taking a look at this video game, fresh universe, and as a result, you can get some wacky and kooky things. One of the early guns that you get, will give you the ability to shoot a little goopy ball that'll launch people in the air, and then they take bonus damage when they're in the air. That's a cool mechanic, even if the execution isn't entirely satisfying in the way that the combat's actually pulled off. The mechanic itself is cool. There's a weapon that shoots a disc that will bounce around between enemies, and then if it bounces back at you, you can melee it and send it bouncing back. So you're kind of playing a little bit of Beyblade, shooting this disc around. That's a really, really cool mechanic, and it's fascinating and used in an interesting way that you don't typically see in the scope of most first-person shooters. Most first-person shooters are, you have your gun, you shoot the bad guy, they die, and then even if you start to get into, like, some of my favorite single-player first-person shooters like Doom, right? Sure, they'll have secondary fires, but it's nothing really crazy. It's pretty rare that you get the super shotgun and a grapple hook on the end of it like we see in Doom Eternal, right? For the most part, it's very plain, and this game has wonderful character, and I'm very excited to see what Squanch Games, I think that's their name, what they do in the future when they learn to execute on the actual gameplay experience a little bit better, because the ideas there are really, really good and fascinating. And that's what I think is a really strong highlight of the game in terms of the gameplay, is the way that you can utilize these abilities not only in the platforming sections and the traversal of the levels, but also in the combat is unique and interesting and engaging, right? And it allows the player to come up with combos in their head and then execute them. The problem is that execution. It's just not as satisfying or visceral as many other games that are well-established franchises, right? In the FPS genre. But I take a little bit of lenience with them with that, because this is their first foray into that field. I also think that the actual levels and the world is pretty interesting. I found it interesting. It's very, Rick and Morty, a lot of grossness and over-sexualization, tons of just vulgar behavior in general. But that's sort of what you expect from these creators. So it's nothing that's super, it doesn't get super duper edgy or anything like that. It still, in general, plays it safe. But there's some pretty fucking funny moments. One that instantly comes to mind and I won't forget for a long time. No spoilers, but you get an achievement called Fallout Won't Let You Do This. And that was a really fucking funny moment. And there's a lot of funny moments throughout the game. And overall, I think it's a fairly enjoyable experience. However, let's get into the cons. Execution is my #1 flaw with the game. While there's so many great ideas, none of them really come fully to fruition. The platforming, while there's so many cool mechanics with it, it never fully feels satisfying. It feels very floaty, like an early access or something like that. There's not a lot of weight to it. Same with the combat, not a lot of weight. When I said that I turned the difficulty down from hard to normal a few hours in, it was because there was absolutely no weight to the combat. It was simply me playing a pretty meh cover shooter with enemies that were super duper tanky. The combat it never really gets satisfying. It is just perfectly serviceable. It will get you from point A to point B, but it's never going to be, a Doom or a Call of Duty or a Battlefield or something like that that's actually quite engaging from a combat perspective. And I think that that's kind of the main issue with the game, is just that it's floaty. That's the best way I can describe it. The combat is floaty. The platforming and stuff like that is very floaty. But the ideas are so good, man. The ideas are good. It just falters the execution. I think that's the main takeaway here. I also think that the game is pretty fucking short. I mean, 10 to 11 hours, maybe 12 hours if you're really taking your time. I did not get anywhere close to 100% on the game, but here's the problem. It didn't do anything to entice me to 100%. As there's a million fucking chests. Like, you'll go through a level and it'll tell you have 2 chests out of like 36 or something. You're like, holy shit, man, that's a lot of chests. But you don't really ever feel enticed to go get those chests because what's in them? What's actually enticing you to explore and acquire them? The vast majority of them are just money. And money can be used for upgrades, but there's not the most upgrades in the game. Especially not interesting ones. Most of them are just like, you get an extra bullet in your gun, you reload a little faster, your ability comes back a little faster. There's some unique ones, like that one I was telling you about, the first gun, where you can shoot people in the air with the secondary fire and then shoot them. You can get a modifier so that when you're shooting people that are in the air, those bullets will then bounce and hit other people and do extra damage. That was really cool. And once again, we come to the idea, right, where these ideas are really, really interesting. However, the execution not quite there, right? So the vast majority of these chests that you can find are simply money. Then you'll get some that are mods, and the vast majority of the mods, like I said, are not that interesting. They're just increasing your mag capacity or whatever. And then you have chests that will give you collectibles. And the collectibles, at least for me, completely pointless. You don't, at least not that I could see, it's not like it's adding it to your house or your hub area so you can actually see these collectibles out in the world. They're just little jokes like, hey, this guy, he's sweaty. It's a little card of a sweaty guy. He's like, this guy's really sweaty. He sweats all the time and he's nasty and slimy, you know? It's shit like that. And it's not particularly interesting or compelling stuff to, you know, I would never go back and be like, I need to 100% this now. There's also not, like, really any decisions in the game. So, at least not ones that actually matter or have an impact. I looked it up. That really have much of an impact at all. So, in that regard, there's not really a need to replay the game. So you're essentially getting one 10 to 12 hour playthrough. And, I don't know, man. That's a little bit rough for me. I think that's a little short, especially for the asking price of $60. But we'll get to that in the rating in just a second here. I think the final con that I would say is some of the jokes, when they don't hit, they really don't hit. And it's not like, you know, oh, it just kind of didn't hit and we're moving on. It's like it will be a 10 plus minute bit that will just not end. There's one bit in particular that this character is kind of following you around and being very annoying. And you're supposed to think they're very annoying. And that's just not very funny when you're trying to play through the game and actually experience the game, especially if you're like me and I get really distracted. I just have this character that is designed to be very annoying, being in my face and shit while I'm trying to fight dudes and constantly talking. He won't shut the fuck up. And then they finally go away. You're like, thank God. And they're back and the bit is resuming. And, you know, some of the bits were just not funny. And it's sort of like beating a dead horse. You know, it's like the horse is dead. I'm not laughing at the horse, and this horse just keeps getting beaten to shit for no real reason when they could just move on. So some of the jokes are really painful when they don't land. Do not do the toilet warp. That's all I'll say. Don't do the fucking toilet warp. Some of the most disgusting and unnecessary shit I've seen in a game. Probably the most disgusting and unnecessary shit I've seen in a game, honestly. And I've played hundreds upon hundreds of games. Just nasty, unnecessary, not funny. You're just gross. Just fucking gross. I don't recommend it. And my final con is just that I don't feel like some of the mechanics are properly utilized. There's this mechanic where you can get these discs and warp things in, and you can actually utilize this kind of secret currency or this rare currency in order to buy these discs that'll allow you to warp this stuff in. And I really thought that they were going to utilize that in more puzzle solving situations or unique areas where it's like, oh, there's this thing and you could warp in this new thing and now that'll help you. But they never really do. You use it once for a puzzle solving, and then you barely use it after that, and it's really just only for those secret warp areas that you can purchase. And those are funny enough, but really you're just buying a bit. That's what you're doing. You're buying a little funny mini level that's going to be some sort of bit. And I don't know, I think they just could have done more with that mechanic. Also, one thing I will say is this game was downright fucking horrendous for my first 5 hours playing, because I played it at launch before they had like a 22 gig day one update that fixed a bunch of the issues. They just were letting people play without that. And the performance was terrible on PC. I have a 3080 Ti and a Ryzen 7 5800X. And this game was chugging, dude. We were getting like 40 FPS. And it was fucking a terrible experience. Tons of glitches. I couldn't buy anything. But luckily, after that, like 21, 22 gigabyte update, the game was running completely fine with everything on very high. No issues in the frame rate. And that's while streaming as well. So it seems like they remedied that. But my first 5 hours, you know, I'm not going to hold that against it because it's a now fix, but it was fucking rough the first 5 hours. And I did still have a lot of glitches, though. Even after that update, I had a bunch of glitches. I had a glitch where a door was closed that was not supposed to be closed. I had to look it up because I was like, where am I supposed to go? I could not figure it out. Probably spent 10 or 15 minutes trying to figure it out, see where I was supposed to go. Oh, yeah, the door is just closed. The door is closed. It's glitched. So I had to close the game, reboot the game, and luckily the door was then open, so I could actually progress. I had several times where I got stuck. But all in all, much better after the day one update. So my verdict, my total thoughts on the game are that there's some fantastic and truly unique ideas present in this title that make it a standout from your typical first-person shooter. It's going to be heavily dependent on if you like Justin Roiland's stuff or not. That is super important. That's really ultimately what's going to determine it, because at the end of the day, the actual gameplay mechanics are merely serviceable, and the thing that carries the serviceable mechanics on its back is the writing and the humor and the voice acting. So if you don't like the writing and the humor and the voice acting, you don't like the stuff that's carrying this experience, then the whole game is going to crumble and it's going to feel like shit. So I totally see both sides of the perspective. I see Eurogamer giving it a 1 out of 5. If you don't like that writing, I can totally understand. And I can see the people giving it, 9 out of 10s and stuff like that. So my opinion on it, I think that the writing hits most of the time. The voice acting always hits. It's always good. It's always solid. And I think that I like enough of the experiences and unique mechanics in the game to give it a positive review. I think it's a 6.5 out of 10 if you're playing on Game Pass. Now for me, a 5 is an average game, a 6 is above average, and a 7 is a good. I think it's right in between above average and good. I can't quite get it to good just because the actual mechanics are so poor. They're so serviceable, and the combat is often the worst part of the game. Same with the platforming. It's often the worst part of the game. Now, it's really cool when you're utilizing all these unique mechanics and weapons and their abilities and stuff in combat, but they never fully hit like they should when they are this interesting. So for me, playing on Game Pass, which if you're a smart individual, there's a million ways you can exploit Game Pass. I have a whole video on the channel if you want to see how I do it, so that I can get basically an entire year's worth of Game Pass for about $1 a month. But so rating it as a Game Pass game, I think it's a 6.5 out of 10. I think it's a pretty enjoyable experience. I would recommend it. It's not like it's too much of your time to sink in, and there's some solid laughs and good times to be had. Rating it as a $60 experience, I cannot agree with the Steam reviews. This game is sitting very, very positive on Steam, and I just can't get behind that. I don't think there's enough content here, and I don't think the content that is here is nearly polished enough to justify a high rating for $60. I think $60 is way overpriced. $40 would even be pushing it for me. This feels like a $30 title, if I'm being entirely honest with you. So for $60, I think this game is like a 4 out of 10. I think it's below average, because all you have is the writing, which while it is good, there's no replayability in this title, and the gameplay is just serviceable. So I cannot even give it a 5, because at $60, you're expecting a premium product. We're talking bug-free. I mean, this is ideally, right? Recent releases have not been pretty, but ideally, in a perfect world, $60 would get you a finished and premium product in line with other AAA releases. And this is not that. So I think a 4 out of 10, 4 for me, is below average. I would not recommend it at $60 at all. I'd say $30 and you're kind of pushing it, but if you're a real big fan of the source material, then obviously $30 would probably be worth it. But just play it on Game Pass. It's totally worth your time if you play it on Game Pass, and I don't see why you wouldn't, because if you're on PC, just play it there. If you're on Xbox, play it there. I think, is this game on PlayStation? I don't know if this game is on PlayStation. If it is on PlayStation, wait for a sale. But I don't even know if it's on PlayStation. So just play it on Game Pass. But yeah, that'll do it for me. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good one. See all of you in the next video. I'm sure I'm running. Bye-bye.